The scream that tore through the wheat field was not human, and it was not quite animal either, something in between, raw with pain and rage, and it snapped Tobias Archer out of a dead sleep and onto his feet before his mind had caught up with his body. He grabbed the skinning knife from the peg by his cot, not the good blade, that one was still packed away with his trade goods, and stumbled out into the gray hour before dawn wearing nothing but his breeches and boots half-laced. The wheat stood chest-high and silver with dew, and something was thrashing through it not 30 paces from his door, snapping stalks, dragging a trail of broken gold behind it like a wound cut into the field itself. He should have run for the town. Reedmark was close enough. If he shouted loud enough, someone might hear, might come with a pitchfork or a bow. Instead, he did what he always did, which was walk straight toward the thing that scared him, because curiosity had always been stronger in him than sense, and because some animal buried under his ribs told him that whatever was dying in his wheat needed a hand more than it needed a mob. What he found stopped his breath. She lay half-curled in a nest of trampled stalks, huge for a woman, taller than he was even, folded onto her side, skin the deep mottled green-gray of river stone, dark hair escaping its braid in wet ropes across her face. A huntress's leathers clung to her, fitted close over broad shoulders and a powerful frame, a sleeveless vest cinched tight with bronze buckles over a laced leather tunic, leggings wrapped tight to the knee, and tucked into high boots scuffed pale with mud. Blood soaked the leather at her side, dark and spreading, glistening black in the pale light, and more of it crusted along a gash on her forearm where she had clearly tried to bind the wound herself and failed. She had a knife in her good hand, and when he came close enough that his shadow fell over her, her eyes opened, amber and fierce, even half-lidded with pain, and the blade came up between them, shaking but steady enough to mean business. "Come no closer, little man," she rasped, in a voice like gravel dragged over stone, "or I will paint this field with something other than wheat." Tobias raised both hands, empty but for the useless little knife, and dropped it into the dirt without being asked. "I am not here to hurt you," he said. "This is my field. You are bleeding into my crop, which I would rather you did not do, but I am more concerned about you dying in it." Her lips curled back from a pair of lower tusks, sharp and white against green skin, in something that was not quite a smile. Concerned, a human concerned for an orc. She laughed, and the laugh cracked into a cough that brought fresh blood to her lips. "Go back to your house, farmer. Whatever is left of me by morning is not your business." "It became my business the moment you screamed on my land," Tobias said, and crouched, slow, keeping his hands visible, close enough now to see the wound properly. A deep puncture just above her hip, ugly and deliberate. The kind of wound made by someone who knew exactly where to put a blade to make a person bleed out slow instead of fast. "Who did this to you?" Something shuddered behind her eyes, quick as a door slamming. "No one," she said. "That is not a wound from no one." "It is not your wound," she snapped and tried to sit up and failed, her arm buckling under her, a low growl of frustration tearing out of her throat that was more pain than menace now. "Leave me be, human." "Tobias," he said, "my name is Tobias Archer. And I am not leaving a woman to die in my wheat. So you may as well stop wasting breath fighting me and start using it to tell me who cut you, so I know what manner of trouble is walking toward my house." She stared at him for a long moment, chest rising and falling in shallow, furious little breaths, blood cooling black on her fingers. "No trouble is coming," she said at last, flat, final, a wall going up brick by brick behind the words. "I will not say who did this. Not to you, not to anyone. Now either help me or get out of my way, but do not ask again." He did not know, then, that he had just met the woman he would spend the rest of his life loving, or that the wound she refused to name would nearly be the thing that killed them both before the season turned. He only knew that she was proud and bleeding and utterly alone, and that something about the fierce, wounded set of her jaw made walking away impossible. "Fine," he said. "Then hold still. This is going to hurt." She did not thank him. She did, however, stop pointing the knife at his throat, which he decided to count as a victory. He half carried, half dragged her to the Linta barn behind his cottage, an ordeal made no easier by the fact that she outweighed him considerably and insisted, even wounded, on walking under her own power more often than not, shoving off his shoulder with a stubbornness that nearly dropped her twice. By the time he got her onto the pile of clean straw he kept for his one mule, sweat had soaked through his shirt, and she had gone the color of old ash beneath her green skin. He had learned rough field stitching from a caravan healer years back, patching arrow wounds and knife cuts on the mountain roads where no physician would ever come, and he put that knowledge to use now, boiling water over the low fire, tearing clean linen into strips, threading a bone needle by lamplight while she watched him with narrowed, wary eyes. "You have done this before," she said, when he pressed a hot cloth to the wound and she hissed but did not flinch away. "Salt and spice caravans through the high passes lose more men to bad luck than to bandits," he said. "You learn to sew a man back together or you learn to bury him. I prefer the former." A traitor. Something like disdain flickered across her face, quickly smothered by another wave of pain as he began to clean the wound properly. "I should have known. Soft hands. Soft trade. Soft hands that are currently keeping you from bleeding to death on my straw," Tobias said mildly, "so perhaps hold your tongue about softness, Huntress." Her eyes flicked to him, sharper now, surprised he had guessed the word. "You know what I am. I know a huntress's leathers when I see them, even torn to ribbons. I know a warrior's scars." He nodded at the old marks crossing her forearms, pale lines laid over dark green skin, testament to a hard life. "And I know when someone is trying very hard not to scream while I put a needle through them, which you are doing admirably, by the way." That surprised a short, sharp laugh out of her, cut off almost immediately as the needle went in again. "Flattery," she muttered through her teeth. "From a farmer with a needle, wonders never cease." "Trader," he corrected. "The farming is a sideline, keeps me fed between caravans." Trader, farmer, healer with a bone needle. She studied him through pain-narrowed eyes, something assessing in the look now instead of only wary. "You are a strange little man." "You are a strange guest to find in a wheat field," he said, and finished the last stitch and sat back on his heels, and only then let himself really look at her, not at the wound, but at her face, at the strong lines of her jaw and the fierce, tired beauty of her, dark hair damp with sweat and river mud. Amber eyes holding his without flinching even now. Even wounded and half-dressed in blood-soaked leather in a human's barn, where every instinct bred into both of them, by generations of war, should have told them to be afraid of each other. He was not afraid. He noted that with some distant surprise, the way a man notices weather changing. "What is your name?" he asked, quieter now. She was silent long enough that he thought she would refuse that too. Then, grudgingly, as if the word cost her something, "Sharamph, Sharamph Steeljaw." "Well, Sharamph Steeljaw," Tobias said, wrapping the last binding around her ribs, careful, impersonal as he could make his hands even though his pulse was not behaving itself at all. "You are going to stay here until that wound closes properly, and you are going to tell me eventually who put a knife in you, because I do not like surprises finding my door in the middle of the night." "Eventually," she said with the ghost of that dangerous almost smile again, "is a very long time, little trader." "I have patience," he said. "It comes with the mountain roads. You learn to wait out storms." "Then wait," she said, and closed her eyes and did not say another word that night, though he noticed, before sleep finally took her, that her hand had curled loosely around the edge of his sleeve, as if some part of her that pride would never admit to did not want him to leave. He did not leave. He sat against the barn wall through what remained of the night, watching her breathe, and did not examine too closely why his chest felt so tight doing it. The trouble Sharamph swore was not coming arrived 3 days later, in the gray light of a market morning, in the shape of 4 men on horseback wearing the blackened copper sashes of the Ashgate Company, riding into Reedmark Square with a rolled parchment, and the particular unhurried arrogance of men who had never once been told no. Tobias was at the grain merchant's stall when they nailed the notice to the town post, and he felt his stomach drop clean through the boards of the boardwalk when he read it over the crowd's shoulders. Escaped bonded property. Female Orc Huntress class, marked Steeljaw. Wounded, dangerous. Reward for return or confirmed kill. Inquire Magistrate VOSS, Auction House, Lower Channel. Beneath the words, drawn crude but recognizable, was a sketch of a woman's face he had spent 3 days memorizing by lamplight. Bonded property, someone near him muttered, spitting into the mud. Ought to hang the beast wherever they find her, not pay to bring her back. Tobias kept his face still through sheer force of will, bought his grain with hands that did not shake, and walked home along the marsh path instead of the road, taking the long way, watching for riders the whole time, his mind racing through everything Sharamph had refused to tell him and everything the parchment had just told him instead. Bonded property. An auction house, a debt someone was collecting with her body as payment. He found her sitting up in the barn when he returned, paler than she should be but stubbornly upright, testing the strength of her stitched side with small, careful movements, and he did not bother with pleasantries. "The Ashgate Company," he said, dropping the sack of grain by the door. "There is a notice in the square. They are calling you bonded property, escaped, wounded, dangerous." He watched her face carefully. "They are offering coin for you, Sharamph, alive or dead." Something went very still in her, a stillness he was learning meant she was afraid and would rather die than show it. "Then you should turn me in," she said flat. "The reward would set you up well, little trader, new roof, new mule, perhaps even a wife who is not covered in your neighbor's blood." "Do not," Tobias said, sharper than he meant to, "insult me by suggesting I would sell you for a roof." Her eyes came up to his, startled by the heat in his voice. "Tell me about the debt," he said, gentler now. "Tell me why the Ashgate Company thinks it owns you." "You do not have to tell me who cut you, if you are so determined to carry that alone. But tell me this much, because if men are riding through my town hunting you, I am already in this whether either of us likes it." For a long moment he thought she would refuse even that. Then, slow, like pulling a blade from a wound, she began to speak. "My clan owed the company a debt," she said. "Tolls on the channels, tribute for passage through waters my people hunted before the company ever laid a plank of that cursed auction house over the water. We refused to pay it twice over what was fair. There was a raid. Not by us, the company sent men to collect by force, and my clan fought back, and the fighting went badly for us. Many died. The debt grew instead of shrinking, the way debts do when men with parchment decide what blood is worth." Her jaw tightened. "I was to be sold. Bonded to whoever bid highest to work off what remained until the company magistrate decided the account was settled, which I am told it never truly is. And you ran." "I ran," she agreed. "The night before the auction. I am not proud of much in my life that I have failed at, but I am not ashamed of running from that block. No one should be ashamed of that." He crouched in front of her, close enough now that he could see the fine tremor still in her hands, pride warring with exhaustion. "But someone caught you before you got clear. Someone who knew exactly how to wound a person to slow them without killing them. That is not the mark of some random guard, Sharamph. That is the mark of someone who wanted you to remember him." Her gaze slid away from his, out toward the wheat swaying gold beyond the open barn door. "I will not speak his name," she said, very quietly, and something in the words was less defiance now than grief. "Ask me anything else, not that." He wanted to push. Every instinct in him wanted to press until the wall came down and she told him everything. But he had learned enough about her in 3 short days to know that pushing would only make the wall thicker. And so instead he reached out slow and closed his hand over hers where it rested against the straw. "All right," he said. "Not that. Not yet." He held her eyes. "But you should know, Sharamph Steeljaw, that I intend to keep you breathing regardless of what you will or will not tell me. So you had better get comfortable in my barn, because I am not sending you back to any auction block while there is breath in my body to stop it." Her fingers turned under his, slow, and gripped back, just once, just for a moment before she pulled away as if she had touched fire. "You are a fool, little traitor," she said, but her voice had gone soft around the edges, and for the first time since he had found her bleeding in his wheat, she looked at him like he was something other than a stranger to be tolerated. "So I am told," Tobias said, and found to his own surprise that he did not mind it at all. The days that followed settled into a strange, charged rhythm neither of them named aloud. Sharamph's wound closed slow but clean under his care, and as her strength returned so did her sharp tongue, which she turned on him with a frequency that suggested she enjoyed the sport of it far more than she would ever admit. She mocked his wheat, calling it a child's garden compared to the wild hunting grounds of the Delta. She mocked his mule, his cottage, the careful, methodical way he counted his trade goods each evening by lamplight, as though coin could multiply through sheer attention. "A trader who counts salt sacks like a miser counts gold," she said one evening, watching him from her seat on an overturned crate, arms crossed over her mended vest. "And yet you have given away 3 days of food and shelter to a wanted woman with a price on her head. Explain that, little trader, if you are so careful with your coin." "Some things are worth more than coin," Tobias said, not looking up from his tally book. "Careful," Sharamph said low, almost teasing, though there was something serious buried under it too. A human saying such things to an orc could start rumors. Let them talk. He glanced up then and found her watching him with an intensity that made his pulse trip over itself. "I have never much cared what Reedmark thinks of me. I doubt I will start now." "No," she said slowly, tilting her head, studying him the way a huntress studies unfamiliar terrain. "I do not think you would." It was 2 nights later, during a supply run to the edge of town for lamp oil and salted fish, that the first true danger found them, and with it, the first crack in the careful distance they had both been pretending to keep. They had gone together against Tobias's better judgment, Sharamph insisting, over his objections, that a woman confined to a barn for a week would go mad before her wound would kill her, and that she intended to see moonlight on open water or die trying. He had relented on the condition she stay wrapped in an old traveling cloak with the hood low, and had congratulated himself on the plan right up, until 2 Ashgate riders came around the granary corner at a walk, lanterns swinging, close enough to see everything if either of them so much as flinched wrong. Tobias did not think. He caught Sharamph's arm and pulled her hard into the narrow gap between 2 stilt storehouses, pressing her back against the damp wood, his own body between her and the lantern light, close enough that he could feel the tension coiled through her like a bowstring, close enough to feel her breath, quick and warm, against his jaw. "Do not move," he whispered. "I am aware," she whispered back, dry despite the danger, though her hand had come up to fist in the front of his shirt. Whether to steady herself or to be ready to shove him aside and fight, he could not tell. The riders passed. Lantern light swept once across the gap, caught nothing but shadow and old wood, and moved on, hooves splashing away through the marsh mud until the sound faded into the general night noise of the Delta. Neither of them moved for a long moment after. "They are gone," Tobias breathed. "I know," Sharamph said, and did not let go of his shirt. He looked down at her then, and she looked up at him, moonlight silvering the sharp planes of her face, her amber eyes very close and very bright, and something that had been building quietly for a week broke loose all at once between them. "This is a very bad idea," Tobias said, voice rough. "Almost certainly," Sharamph agreed and closed the distance herself. The kiss was nothing gentle. It was hunger and fear and a week of circling each other like wary animals, all crashing together at once, her hand fisting tighter in his shirt to drag him closer, his own hand finding the curve of her waist above the healing wound, careful even now, even wanting. She tasted of the wild Delta air and something fiercer underneath, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she looked as startled by her own boldness as he felt. "That," she said, "should not have happened." "No," Tobias agreed. "It absolutely should not have." Neither of them moved away. "If you tell anyone," Sharamph said, low, dangerous, "that a Steeljaw huntress kissed a salt trader in a storehouse alley, I will deny it, and then I will break something of yours." "My lips are sealed," Tobias said, "mostly because they are otherwise occupied," and he kissed her again before she could argue, and this time she laughed against his mouth, low and startled and warm, and let him. They did not speak of it again on the walk home, though her hand found his in the dark twice, and twice he did not let go. The plan, when it finally took shape, was born less of careful strategy than of stubborn necessity. The debt the Ashgate Company claimed against Sharamph's clan was a staggering sum, more silver than Tobias had seen in his whole trading life, and there was no honest way to raise it selling salt sacks in Reedmark's little market square. But there was the high mountain run-a caravan of rare mountain spice and pale crystal salt bound for the walled market town 3 passes north, goods that fetched triple price if a man was brave or foolish enough to risk the road alone. "It is madness," Tobias admitted, spreading his few remaining coins across the table in his cottage, Sharamph leaning over his shoulder, close enough that her braid brushed his arm. "But it is the only honest coin large enough to matter. If I can sell that spice at the northern market, I can bring back enough to offer the company a settlement instead of a fight." "You mean to buy my freedom," Sharamph said slowly, "with salt and spice." "I mean to buy you out from under a debt that was never fairly yours to carry," Tobias said. "Call it what you like." She was quiet a moment, studying him with an expression he could not quite read. "No one has ever tried to buy my freedom before," she said finally. "Only my body for coin on a block. This is," she stopped, seemed to search for the word, "different." "It is not charity," Tobias said, gruff, uncomfortable with the raw look in her eyes. "You will earn your keep. You know the Delta channels better than any guide I could hire, and you can fight better than any guard. If we are doing this, we do it together." Her mouth curved, slow and sharp. "Careful, trader. Keep talking like that and I will start to think you enjoy my company." "Gods forbid," Tobias said, and grinned when she laughed. The mountain road proved every bit as dangerous as its reputation, and twice as beautiful. They traveled by reed boat through the winding delta channels first, poling silent through mist-strapped waterways lined with stilt houses and hanging lanterns, past fishing families who eyed the orc woman with open suspicion, and the human trader beside her with confused curiosity, before striking the dry trail that climbed toward the passes. It was on the third night of the climb, camped in the shelter of a rock overhang with a thin fire between them and the wind, that Sharamph finally told him about the courtship customs of her people, half teasing, half serious, in a way that made his chest ache with wanting. "Among my clan," she said, turning a small carved bone token over in her fingers, firelight catching the old scratch markings on it, "when a warrior wishes to claim another as hers, she does not ask. She proves it, in battle, in hardship. She stands beside the one she wants until there is no question left in anyone's mind who belongs to whom. And if the one she wants is a soft-handed human trader who counts salt sacks for a living," Tobias asked, watching the firelight play over her face. Sharamph's eyes lifted to his, unguarded in a way he had not seen before. "Then perhaps," she said, "she decides that soft hands which stitch wounds and stand between her and Ashgate riders are worth more than any warrior's spear arm." She held out the little bone token, worn smooth with age. "This was my mother's marriage token, a claiming mark. Among my people, when a warrior gives this to the one she has chosen, it means she means to keep them. Always." Tobias's breath caught. "Sharamph, I am not giving it to you yet," she said quickly, almost fierce, tucking it back against her chest. "You have not yet earned it, trader. Prove yourself on this road first." But her voice had gone soft, and she did not look away from him, and the fire crackled low between them while the wind howled over the pass, and neither of them moved to break the moment. He crossed the space between them instead, kneeling in front of her, and this time when he kissed her, it was slow, deliberate, nothing stolen about it, and she met him with the same aching tenderness, her hand coming up to cradle his jaw with a gentleness that felt like a promise all its own. "I do not need a token to know what I feel," Tobias murmured against her lips. "But I will earn it anyway, Sharamph Steeljaw, whatever it takes." "See that you do," she said, and kissed him again, and the mountain wind seemed a little less cold after that. The road tested him exactly as she had warned it would. 2 days later, descending toward the northern market with the mule cart loaded heavy with spice sacks, a pack of highland bandits dropped down from the rocks with drawn blades, 6 of them against Tobias's 1 mule and a cart of goods that would have fed their whole camp for a season. He had faced bandits before, on other runs, and had always talked or bribed his way past them. This time, before he could so much as reach for the coin purse he kept for exactly such occasions, Sharamph was already moving, throwing off her travel cloak in one fluid motion, drawing the long hunting knife she had recovered and sharpened during the climb, and putting herself squarely between the bandits and the cart with a snarl that made 2 of the 6 take an immediate step back. "The goods pass," she said, voice carrying flat and hard across the rocks, "or you carry your friends home in pieces. Choose quickly." The bandit leader, a scarred man with a woodsman's axe, laughed, not entirely steady. "An orc bodyguard. Didn't know traders could afford such fine protection these days." "I'm not his bodyguard," Sharamph said, and something in her tone made the laughter die in the man's throat. "I am his." She fought like something out of an old war ballad, brutal and beautiful, disarming the first man who lunged with a twist that sent his blade spinning into the rocks, driving her shoulder into the second hard enough to crack ribs, and Tobias, heart hammering, did not simply watch. He grabbed the sling he kept for scaring off mountain cats, loaded it with a fist-sized stone, and put it square into the temple of a 4th bandit circling behind her, dropping him where he stood. Between the 2 of them, the fight was over in less than a minute, the bandit leader backing away with his remaining men, cursing, abandoning the ambush entirely rather than lose more blood over one trader's cart. Sharamph stood in the aftermath breathing hard, blood on her knuckles that was not her own, and turned to find Tobias already crossing to her, checking her over with hands that shook slightly from the aftermath of fear. "You are unhurt," he demanded. "I am Orc," she said, though there was warmth under the wry pride in it. "It takes more than 6 Highland thieves to trouble me." Her eyes searched his face in turn, something fierce and possessive in the look. "You." "That was well thrown, trader. I did not know you had a sling arm. I did not know you had quite that particular way of announcing you belonged to me," Tobias said, still catching his breath, "but I find I liked hearing it." Sharamph's mouth curved, slow and dangerous and pleased. "Did you?" she said, and closed the distance between them without further preamble, and kissed him hard enough to steal what little breath the fight had left him, right there among the scattered spice sacks and the fading echo of retreating bandits, and he laughed against her mouth and kissed her back just as fiercely, and thought that whatever price this road demanded of him, he would pay it gladly for a woman who fought at his side like that, and then claimed him with a kiss in the same breath. They sold the spice at the northern market for a price that made the merchant haggle twice out of pure disbelief, and Tobias rode the long road back toward the delta with a purse heavier than he had ever carried, and a woman beside him who had, somewhere on that mountain road, become the whole compass of his life without either of them quite deciding to make it so. The trouble waiting for them in Reedmark, when they finally returned, was worse than either of them had feared. They came down out of the hills to find the delta in an uproar, fishing boats pulled hard against the docks, stilt house shutters barred despite the mild weather, and a fresh notice nailed over the old one in the town square, this time bearing not just Sharamph's likeness, but a warning that harboring her constituted theft of company property, punishable by seizure of land and goods. Worse than the notice was the man Tobias found waiting outside his own cottage when they finally reached the wheat field, sitting easy on a fine gray horse as though he owned the ground beneath it. An orc, broad and scarred, wearing Ashgate colors over leathers, a whip coiled at his belt beside a long, curved blade. Sharamph went utterly still beside the cart the moment she saw him. Tobias felt her hand find his wrist, gripping hard enough to bruise, and understood with a cold drop in his stomach that he was looking at the man who had cut her in the dark and left her bleeding in his field. "Grask," Sharamph said, and the name came out of her like something spat, like poison finally lanced. Sharamph Steeljaw, the orc called Grask, smiled, unpleasant, showing a chipped tusk. "You run fast for a wounded thing. I had begun to think the Delta had swallowed you whole." His eyes slid to Tobias, dismissive. "And you have found yourself a human pet. How touching. Does the magistrate know his property has been playing farmer's wife?" "Say another word to her," Tobias said low, before he had fully decided to speak at all, stepping between Grask's horse and Sharamph without conscious thought, "and I will put you off that horse myself." Grask laughed outright at that, a short, ugly bark. Brave words from a man made of salt sacks and soft bread. His gaze cut back to Sharamph, and something colder moved behind his eyes. "You have not told him, then, about Drazik, about Uzka?" He watched the flinch that went through her at the names and smiled wider, satisfied. "No, of course you have not. You always were sentimental for a huntress." "Who are Drazik and Uzka?" Tobias asked, though some part of him already dreaded the answer. Sharamph's jaw was tight enough to crack stone. "My brother," she said very quietly, "and my aunt. The company holds them at the auction house. Hostages against my clan's remaining debt. Held to ensure I did not run, and when I ran regardless," her eyes closed briefly. "Held to ensure I did not fight when caught, and did not speak the name of the man sent to catch me." Grask's smile did not waver. "She understands the arithmetic of it better than most. Speak my name to the wrong ears, resist too hard, and the debt collectors decide the hostages have outlived their usefulness. Simple math, farmer. That is why she has said nothing all this time, however deeply your soft human heart wished otherwise." He gathered his reins, unhurried, entirely unafraid of the man glaring up at him with fists clenched. "The auction has been rescheduled. 3 nights hence, under the full flood tide, when the channels run deep enough for the magistrate's barges. Bring her back yourself, traitor, and perhaps he shows mercy to the hostages. Refuse, and I promise you, mercy will not enter into what happens next." He turned the horse, unhurried, and rode off toward the marsh road without a backward glance, leaving silence and dread behind him thick as the evening fog. Tobias turned to Sharamph, who stood with her fists shaking at her sides, tears she refused to let fall standing bright and furious in her amber eyes. "That is why," she said, voice cracking for the first time since he had known her, "I would not say his name. Every time I opened my mouth to speak it, I saw my brother's face. 15 summers old, Tobias. 15 summers, and they hold him over water on a debt he never chose." Her hands came up to cover her face, just for a moment, just long enough to let the mask crack entirely. "I could not risk it. I could not risk them for my own pride or my own safety, or," she looked up at him, raw, "or even for you." Tobias closed the distance and pulled her into his arms, and for the first time since he had found her bleeding in the wheat, Sharamph Steeljaw let herself be held, her forehead dropping against his shoulder, her powerful frame trembling with an exhaustion that had nothing to do with wounds. "Then we go get them," Tobias said into her hair, fierce and certain, feeling something settle into place inside him like the last stone in an arch. 3 nights. It is not much time, but it is enough if we are clever, and if you will let me stand beside you instead of trying to carry this alone." Sharamph lifted her head, searching his face, and whatever she found there seemed to steady something in her. "You would go against the Ashgate Company," she said slowly, "against armed guards on their own ground over open water for people you have never met." "I would go against the Ashgate Company," Tobias said, "for you. Your brother and your aunt come as part of the bargain, and I would fight for them gladly too, but do not mistake me, Sharamph. I'm not doing this out of some noble notion of justice. I am doing it because you matter to me more than my own safety, and I intend to keep you, whatever that costs." Something fierce and bright broke across her face then, equal parts fear and hope, and a fierceness he had come to recognize as simply hers. "Then we had better plan well," she said. "Because I do not intend to lose you to Ashgate Steel after everything else this cursed season has cost me." The plan they built over the following 2 days was equal parts desperation and daring, assembled from Sharamph's intimate knowledge of the Delta's hidden channels and Tobias's hard-won trader's understanding of how frightened, greedy men could be manipulated. They had little coin left after the mountain run and no army to call on, only a handful of allies gathered from unlikely corners. A fisherman named Corin, whose boat Tobias had once saved from repossession with an honest word to a magistrate. 2 of Sharamph's clan kin who slipped into the delta under cover of the flood mists, once word reached them through channels Tobias never quite understood. An old widow Hask, who ran the tannery and hated the Ashgate Company with a passion born of watching them squeeze 3 seasons of profit from her late husband's debts. It was not an army. It was barely a dozen determined people against a fortified auction house full of armed guards, but it was what they had, and on the 3rd night, under a sky heavy with storm and a tide running high and black through the delta channels, it was enough to try. The auction house stood on its own island of driven pilings in the deepest part of the delta, lantern-lit and looming, a long low building on stilts connected to the mainland only by a single narrow floating dock and a scatter of moored barges. Magistrate Voss had chosen the ground well. There was no approach that did not funnel through open water where his guards could see attackers coming from every direction. No cover for 100 paces in any direction, but reeds too thin to hide behind. "This is madness," Corin the fisherman muttered, poling his reed boat low through the marsh grass at the delta's edge, watching the lantern light glimmer on the water ahead. "We will be seen the moment we come within 100 yards of that dock." "We are meant to be seen," Sharamph said, crouched low in the bow, her huntress leathers dark against the night, a borrowed bow across her knees. "That is the point." The plan hinged on chaos, on speed, and on a piece of local knowledge only Sharamph and her clan kin possessed. The auction house's foundation pilings straddled the mouth of an old flood channel, sealed shut generations ago by a heavy sluice gate the company used to control the tide beneath their own floorboards. Open that gate at the height of the flood tide, and the water beneath the auction house would surge violently upward through the old channel, flooding the lower levels and throwing the whole structure into chaos, buying precious minutes of confusion for a rescue. Tobias's part was simpler and no less dangerous. Draw the guard's attention to the main dock with a decoy approach loud enough to be seen, buying Sharamph and her kin the minutes they needed to slip through the flood channel unseen, and reach the hostages before anyone realized the true attack was coming from beneath their feet. "I do not like this part," Sharamph said quietly, as their boats separated in the reeds, hers turning toward the hidden channel, his toward the open approach and the waiting guards. "I do not like sending you toward their spears while I go the safer way." "Safer," Tobias repeated, arching a brow. "You are swimming under a flooding building full of armed men to reach hostages guarded by the man who already tried to kill you once." "That is not the point," Sharamph said, fierce, and reached across the gap between the boats to grip his hand hard, urgent. "If something happens to you, traitor, nothing is going to happen to me," Tobias said, though his heart was hammering fit to burst. "I have a decoy plan and a fast boat and Corin's grandfather's old dueling pistol, which may or may not fire, but sounds impressive when it does not explode in my hand." He leaned across and kissed her, quick and fierce, tasting salt and rain already starting to fall. "Go get your family, Sharamph Steeljaw. I will be waiting when this is done." "You had better be," she said, voice rough, and then the boats parted, and there was no more time for words. What followed was the kind of chaos that later, in calmer years, Tobias would struggle to describe fully even to Sharamph herself, because it had happened too fast and too violently to hold together as a single memory, more a series of lightning-lit fragments burned into him forever. He remembered poling hard toward the main dock with Corin and Widow Hask, shouting and beating on an old cooking pot to draw every guard's eye, the dueling pistol firing once with a crack that sent 2 company guards scrambling for cover behind barrels, the storm breaking in full fury overhead just as the first shouts of alarm went up from inside the auction house. He remembered Grask's face appearing at the rail above, lit orange by torchlight, recognizing him even at that distance, and the cold certainty that settled into his stomach when the Orc enforcer bellowed for guards to converge on the main dock, exactly as planned, exactly where Tobias now stood alone in an open boat with only an empty pistol and a fisherman's gaff for weapons. He remembered the sluice gate groaning open somewhere beneath the structure, a sound like the earth itself tearing, and the whole auction house lurching as black floodwater surged up through the old channel, exactly as Sharamph's kin had promised it would, timbers cracking, lanterns swinging wild, guards abandoning their posts on the upper level to scramble for the stability of solid stilts. He remembered, with a clarity that would stay with him the rest of his life, seeing Sharamph burst up out of the flooded lower level with her brother slung over one shoulder, a thin, terrified boy barely old enough to be called a man, and her Aunt Uzka limping beside her, and behind them, framed in torchlight and fury, Grask Ironhide with his curved blade drawn and murder plain on his scarred face. Tobias did not think. He drove his boat straight for the shattered lower dock, ignoring the guards converging behind him, ignoring the pistol lying useless and spent at his feet, and threw himself onto the collapsing walkway just as Grask lunged for Sharamph's exposed back. He caught the blade on the fisherman's gaff, more luck than skill, deflecting it wide, and the impact sent white fire up his arm and dropped him hard onto the splintering boards. But it bought Sharamph the half-second she needed to spin, drop her brother safely behind her, and meet Grask's next strike with her own recovered blade. What followed was brutal and fast, Orc steel against Orc steel in the storm-lashed dark, Sharamph fighting not with the cold discipline of a duel, but with the raw, protective fury of a woman defending everything she had left in the world. And Tobias, bleeding from a shallow cut along his forearm where the gaff had not fully turned the blade, dragged himself upright and threw himself bodily between Grask and the terrified boy. The moment the enforcer tried to circle past Sharamph to strike at easier prey. "Get behind me," Tobias snarled at Drazik, shoving the boy back toward the collapsing dock's edge, and turned to find Grask's blade already swinging for his own unprotected head. He should have died in that moment. He knew it even as he threw himself backward, felt the wind of the blade pass a hand's width from his skull, felt his boots slip on wet, splintering wood, felt his balance go entirely and the black flood water rushing up to meet him. He did not die, because Sharamph moved faster than thought, faster than fear, driving her shoulder into Grask's side hard enough to send them both crashing into the rail, and in the same motion caught the front of Tobias's shirt with her free hand and hauled him bodily back from the edge with a strength that should not have been possible in the middle of a duel, setting him half-sprawled but alive on solid boards. "I told you," she snarled, breathless, blocking Grask's next furious strike with her forearm guard, steel screaming against steel, "that nothing was going to happen to you, traitor. Stop testing that promise." "Duly noted," Tobias gasped, scrambling up, and this time when Grask lunged again, distracted by fury, Tobias drove the fisherman's gaff hard into the back of the enforcer's knee, dropping him with a howl of pain onto the shattered boards, and Sharamph finished it a heartbeat later with a blow that left Grask disarmed, bleeding and finally beaten, sprawled at her feet with her blade at his throat, and the storm howling overhead like judgment itself. "Yield," she said, voice flat and final, "or join the flood, Grask. I am done being merciful to men who threaten children to keep me quiet. Grask, staring up at the blade with the particular terror of a bully who has finally met something stronger than himself, yielded. The rest of the night dissolved into a blur of shouting and torn nets, and the crackle of Magistrate Voss's authority collapsing entirely as his auction house flooded and his enforcer surrendered, and the townsfolk of Reedmark, drawn by the commotion, arrived by boat and lantern light to find an Ashgate operation exposed in ugly detail hostages, forced debts, a bonded servitude ledger dragged soaking from a strongbox that Widow Hask, with grim satisfaction, read aloud to the gathered crowd by torchlight, revealing debts inflated far beyond any honest tally, revealing names of a dozen other desperate families quietly ruined the same way Sharamph's clan had been. Magistrate Voss did not survive the crowd's fury with much dignity intact. By dawn he had fled downriver in a fishing skiff with what little coin he could carry, and no one in Reedmark much cared to give chase, having other, better uses for their anger, namely, burning the false ledgers on the dock in a great crackling pyre that lit the misty morning like a second sunrise, while freed hostages wept in relatives' arms and Grask Ironhide sat bound and defeated at the edge of it all, stripped of the borrowed authority that had made him dangerous. Tobias found Sharamph standing at the very edge of the burning pyre as the sun came up properly over the delta, her brother Drazik pressed close against her side, still shaking, her Aunt Uzka speaking low and fierce to a cluster of other freed hostages nearby, and something in the set of Sharamph's shoulders, watching the false debt burn to ash, looked lighter than he had ever seen her. She turned when he approached, and the look on her face when she saw him bloodied, exhausted, very much alive made something crack open warm in his chest. "You are hurt," she said immediately, catching his wounded arm before he could protest, examining the shallow cut with a huntress's practiced eye. "You are freed," he countered, "which strikes me as the better trade. Do not deflect." But her mouth curved despite herself, and she pulled him into the circle of her arms with a fierceness that had nothing gentle in it at all, holding him hard enough that his ribs protested, her face buried against his shoulder, and he felt rather than heard the shudder that went through her, the delayed terror of everything that could have gone wrong finally catching up now that it was safely over. "I thought I would lose you to that blade," she said, muffled, furious with herself for the admission. "I have faced 100 dangers in my life, traitor, and none of them frightened me the way watching Grask swing for your head frightened me. I am still here," Tobias murmured into her hair, "bruised, bloody, very much still yours if you will have me." She pulled back just enough to look at him properly, amber eyes bright with something raw and unguarded, and reached into the collar of her leathers to draw out the small carved bone token she had shown him on the mountain road, worn smooth with generations of handling. "I told you," she said, voice rough, "that you had not yet earned this." "Have I earned it now?" Tobias asked, hardly daring to breathe. "You stood between my brother and a blade," Sharamph said. "You threw yourself into a fight you could not win for people you had never met because they mattered to me. You have fought at my side, bled at my side, and did not once ask me to be less than what I am to make your own fear easier to carry." Her hand closed around his, pressing the little bone token into his palm, warm from her own body. "Among my people, this is a claiming. It means I have chosen you, Tobias Archer, above all others, and mean to keep you for as long as breath remains in either of us. It is not given lightly, and it is not given twice." Tobias's fingers closed around the token, throat tight. "Then I accept it," he said, "and I offer you the only claiming custom I know, which is simpler than yours but no less true." He drew a slow breath. "I vow to stand beside you through every storm this world sends, to fight at your side rather than in front of it whenever you allow me the honor, and to love you, fiercely and completely, for the whole of whatever life we are lucky enough to build together. Wherever that life takes root, your delta channels or my wheat field, or somewhere between the two, I want it to be with you." Around them, the burning pyre crackled low, and the freed hostages wept and embraced their families, and the whole ruined dawn smelled of smoke and salt marsh and new beginnings. And Sharamph Steeljaw looked at the human traitor who had stitched her wound without asking her price, who had bled defending her family, who had chosen her over every ounce of common sense a lifetime of prejudice should have taught him. And she kissed him then, in front of the whole gathered town of Reedmark, in front of her freed kin and his stunned neighbors and the smoking wreckage of the debt that had nearly cost them everything, kissed him slow and cert and utterly unashamed, sealing a vow neither storm nor company nor old hatred would ever again be strong enough to break. The weeks that followed were not without their own small difficulties. Old prejudices did not vanish overnight simply because a huntress had helped burn a corrupt magistrate's ledgers, and there were still townsfolk in Reedmark who eyed Sharamph with wary distance, and orc elders among her scattered clan kin who muttered about huntresses claiming human traders as though the old wars had never happened. But difficulty, Tobias found, was a far gentler thing to face with Sharamph beside him than it had ever been to face alone. Drazik took to helping in the wheat field with the restless energy of a boy freed from a debt he had never understood, learning to swing a scythe under Tobias's patient instruction, with an enthusiasm that made Sharamph laugh outright for the first time in longer than Tobias had known her. Uzka, sharp-tongued and formidable in her own right, took over trading negotiations with the Delta fishing families, with a shrewdness that quietly doubled the modest profits of Tobias's little homestead within a single season. And Widow Hask, of all people, became an unlikely and fierce champion of the household, silencing more than one wagging tongue in the Reedmark market with nothing more than a pointed glare, and a reminder of exactly whose actions had burned the town's corrupt debts to ash. On a mild evening near the wheat harvest, gold light slanting long and warm across the ripening field, Tobias found Sharamph standing at the edge of the crop where he had first found her bleeding all those months before, running her fingers absently through the heavy grain heads, her huntress leathers, the same fitted vest and leggings she had worn since the night he found her, mended now, cared for, worn soft with time rather than replace catching the last light like burnished bronze. "You are thinking of that first night," Tobias said, coming to stand beside her. "I am thinking," Sharamph said, "that I nearly died in this field and that it is now, against every likelihood the old wars would have predicted, the place I feel most at home in all the world." She turned to look at him, and the last golden light caught the fierce, open love in her amber eyes without any wall left to hide it. "I did not intend to fall in love with a soft-handed salt trader who counts grain sacks by lamplight. Tobias Archer. I fought it rather stubbornly, if you recall." "I recall a great deal of insulting my wheat," Tobias said, grinning. "The wheat remains unimpressive," Sharamph said deadpan, and then softened, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw with a gentleness that still, even now, undid him completely. "But the man who grows it is not. He is the bravest, kindest, most stubbornly loyal creature I have ever known, human or otherwise, and I intend to keep him at my side for the whole of my life, exactly as I promised over the ashes of a burning debt." "Good," Tobias said, voice thick with feeling. "Because I have grown rather fond of being kept, Sharamph Steeljaw." She kissed him then, slow and certain in the golden evening light, standing in the same wheat that had once borne witness to her blood, and now bore witness instead to a love neither prejudice nor debt nor blade had managed to break. And when at last they walked back together toward the little cottage at the edge of the field, hand in hand, the bone token resting warm against Tobias's chest where he had worn it every day since the night the auction house burned, neither of them looked back at the shadows of the past. There was nothing left there worth returning to. Everything that mattered now lay ahead of them, side by side, exactly as they had chosen it to be.